The manager, whose face had just been flushed with the red-hot anger of corporate pressure and middle management tyranny, now stood completely frozen. His fingers, slick with the inevitable grease of a long shift handling fry baskets and counting loose change, trembled as he peeled back the layers of the cheap coarse paper napkin. The oppressive heat radiating from the asphalt outside seemed to vanish, replaced by a sudden, breathless vacuum inside the small drive-through booth. Chloe watched his eyes widen, his pupils dilating as if he were staring directly into the blinding Texas sun. He did not speak. The constant, maddening symphony of beeping fryers, shouting line cooks, and crackling intercoms faded into a distant, irrelevant hum. The world had narrowed down to the small square of paper resting on the stainless steel counter. Inside the napkin lay a stack of crisp, perfectly aligned bills. They were not the crumpled, sweat-stained singles or fives that usually passed through that window. They were 5 immaculate $100 bills, their green ink stark and vibrant against the white paper. $500. For a young woman who had been weeping silently over the prospect of losing a minimum wage shift, it was an absolute fortune. It was a lifeline thrown into a raging, unforgiving river. It was the exact amount she needed to cover the nursing textbooks she had been putting off buying, the exact amount that stood between her and academic failure. But as staggering as the money was, it was not the currency that stole the breath from the manager's lungs and brought a fresh, entirely different wave of tears to Chloe's eyes. It was the object resting in the center of that small fortune, a single black guitar pick. It was thick, professional grade, with a matte finish that absorbed the harsh fluorescent lights of the restaurant. Engraved on its surface, in elegant, sweeping silver ink, was a signature that any soul born and raised in the state of Texas would recognize in a single heartbeat. It was a signature that had graced millions of albums, a name that echoed through sold-out stadiums and quiet, dusty honky-tonks alike. Beneath the pick, written in a steady, deliberate hand with a blue ballpoint pen, were words that carried the weight of a sermon delivered in a quiet country church. The manager read them aloud, his voice stripped of all its previous venom, reduced to a hoarse, trembling whisper. Hard work and manners never go out of style. Keep standing tall. George Strait. Chloe felt her knees give out. She leaned heavily against the cold steel of the counter, her hand flying to her mouth to stifle a sob. The man in the dusty Chevy Silverado, the man who had spoken to her with such gentle, unwavering respect, the man who had patiently waited while she was berated and humiliated, was the king of country himself. He had not announced his presence. He had not demanded special treatment or free food. He had simply sat in his truck, a silent observer to the everyday struggles of a working-class girl, and decided to extend a hand of grace. The manager looked from the napkin to Chloe, his face completely drained of color. The realization of what had just transpired crashed over him like a physical blow. He had been screaming at this young woman, threatening her livelihood, right in front of a man whose songs he had grown up listening to, a man who represented the very best of the Texas spirit. A deep, profound shame washed over the manager. He swallowed hard, the tough exterior of a fast food boss crumbling into the dust. "Do you know who that was?" he stammered, his voice barely audible over the hum of the air conditioner. Without waiting for an answer, without caring about the line of cars that was now wrapping around the building, the manager grabbed Chloe gently by the elbow. "We need to see the tapes," he said, his tone entirely changed, stripped of authority and filled with pure, unadulterated awe. He led her away from the window, leaving the headset resting on the counter, and marched toward the cramped back office. The security room was a tiny, windowless closet that smelled strongly of ozone, old coffee, and industrial floor cleaner. A single desk held a bulky monitor and a digital recording system that hummed loudly in the confined space. The manager dropped into the rolling chair and frantically clicked the mouse, bringing up the grid of security cameras. He maximized the feed from the drive-through window, the grainy black and white image filling the screen. He dragged the timeline back 10 minutes. Word had quickly spread through the kitchen that something extraordinary had happened at the window. The line cooks, their aprons stained with mustard and grease, the cashiers from the front counter, and the shift supervisors all abandoned their stations. They crowded into the doorway of the tiny office, peering over the manager's shoulder, their breathing synchronized in silent anticipation. On the screen, the digital clock in the corner ticked backward, then forward as the manager hit play. They watched the scene unfold with the clarity of a silent film. They saw the sleek, expensive SUV pull up. Even without audio, the aggressive body language of the driver was palpable. They saw him throw the bag of food back at the window. They saw the way Chloe shrank back, the way her shoulders shook as she tried to maintain her composure. The kitchen staff murmured in anger, seeing the abuse their co-worker had endured. Then the SUV sped away, leaving a cloud of exhaust. The screen showed the next vehicle slowly pulling into the frame, the old, dusty Chevy Silverado. The camera angle was high, looking down at the driver's side window. For a moment, the driver was just a shadow beneath the brim of a well-worn cowboy hat, but as he leaned forward to hand the small, folded napkin to the cashier, the harsh security light caught his profile perfectly. The strong jawline, the calm, measured demeanor, the unmistakable presence of a man completely at peace with himself and the world around him. It was George Strait. The room erupted into a collective gasp. A burly line cook, a man who had worked the grills for 15 years and claimed to have never shed a tear, wiped his eyes with the back of his flour-dusted hand. The silence that followed was heavy with reverence. They watched as the manager on the screen marched up to the window, angry and impatient, and they watched as the legendary singer simply ignored the hostility, focusing entirely on delivering his message of encouragement to the weeping girl. They watched the truck pull away, disappearing into the glare of the afternoon sun. The manager paused the video on the final frame of the Silverado's taillights. He turned slowly in his chair and looked at Chloe. The young woman was staring at the screen, tears streaming freely down her face, clutching the black guitar pick to her chest as if it were a sacred relic. "I am so sorry, Chloe," the manager whispered, his voice cracking. "I am so sorry for how I treated you today. I was wrong. We get so caught up in the rush, in the numbers, in the speed of it all, that we forget we are dealing with human beings. He taught me a lesson today, too." That afternoon, the atmosphere inside the Lone Star Burgers and Fries shifted completely. The frantic, angry energy dissipated, replaced by a quiet, determined grace. The staff worked together with a new sense of camaraderie. The customers were greeted with genuine smiles. The manager stepped in to help bag fries and take orders, his previous arrogance entirely washed away by the humbling encounter with true greatness. It did not take long for the footage to find its way out of that cramped back office. One of the shift supervisors had recorded the monitor with his smartphone, capturing the silent drama of the drive-thru. By that evening, the video had been uploaded to the internet. It had no sound, no flashy editing, just the raw, unvarnished truth of a hot Texas afternoon. The caption simply read, "The King shows us how it is done." Within hours, the video exploded. It swept across social media platforms like a wildfire moving through dry brush. Millions of people watched the grainy footage. They watched the arrogance of the wealthy executive, a stark representation of the impatience and cruelty that so often plagues modern society. And then they watched the quiet, stoic intervention of a man who possessed more fame and wealth than the executive could ever dream of, yet chose to act with the humility of a simple rancher. The internet, a place so often filled with division and anger, united in a collective moment of admiration. Fans from all over the world flooded the comments, not expressing surprise, but profound pride. This was the man they had listened to for decades. This was the man who sang about faith, family, and the simple truths of life. To see him living out those values when he thought no one was watching, when there were no cameras or reporters around, validated everything they believed about him. He was not playing a character. He was exactly the man his music claimed him to be. The identity of the angry man in the SUV was eventually uncovered by internet sleuths, but the public reaction was surprisingly restrained. There was no massive campaign of vengeance. Instead, people simply pointed to the video and said, "Do not be that guy. Be the cowboy." The contrast was enough of a punishment. The true focus remained on the act of kindness, the beautiful simplicity of a man using his blessings to lift up someone who was sinking. For Chloe, the impact of that day rippled far beyond the viral fame of the video. She respectfully declined all requests for television interviews and morning show appearances. She did not want to capitalize on a moment of pure grace. Instead, She took the $500 and walked directly to the university bookstore. She purchased the heavy, expensive medical volumes she needed for her nursing program. She paid off a lingering utility bill that had been keeping her awake at night. The financial relief was immense, a heavy boulder lifted from her weary shoulders. But the true gift, the one that altered the trajectory of her life, was the small black piece of plastic and the ink on the napkin. She bought a simple, elegant glass frame. She carefully arranged the napkin, smoothing out the creases, and placed the silver-signed guitar pick right in the center. She hung that frame directly above her small desk in her cramped apartment. Over the next 2 years, the journey through nursing school tested her in ways she had never imagined. There were nights when the sheer volume of information seemed impossible to absorb. There were clinical rotations that left her physically exhausted and emotionally drained, dealing with sickness, pain, and the harsh realities of the medical field. There were moments, sitting alone at her desk at 3 in the morning, with the glow of a desk lamp illuminating her tired eyes, when she wanted to close the books and walk away. She wanted to surrender to the fatigue. But every time the doubt crept in, every time the heavy blanket of exhaustion threatened to suffocate her dreams, she would look up. She would see the black pick. She would read the words written in blue ink. Hard work and manners never go out of style. Keep standing tall. She would remember the smell of the hot asphalt, the sound of the V8 engine, and the gentle, respectful tone of a man who had looked at a weeping fast food worker and seen someone worthy of dignity. She would remember that a stranger, a legend, had believed in her value when she had forgotten it herself. She would wipe her eyes, take a deep breath, and turn the page of her textbook. She refused to let him down. She refused to let herself down. Time moved forward as it always does, carrying the seasons across the vast Texas landscape. The scorching summers gave way to brief, crisp winters, and the cycle repeated. The Lone Star burgers and fries underwent a minor renovation. The old, faded sign was replaced, and the drive-through lane was repaved. But the management made one specific, permanent addition. Right below the drive-through window, bolted securely to the brick wall, was a small, unassuming bronze plaque. It did not mention the viral video or the money. It simply read, "The King's Corner, kindness spoken here." It became a local landmark, a quiet reminder to every rushed commuter and impatient traveler that the person handing them their food was a human being deserving of respect. 2.5 years after that sweltering summer afternoon, the sky over San Antonio broke open, delivering a torrential, cleansing rain. The smell of wet earth and cooled pavement filled the air, a scent that always felt like a promise of new beginnings in the arid state. Chloe stood in the staging area of the university auditorium, surrounded by hundreds of her peers. She was dressed in a flowing black gown, a crisp white nursing cap secured to her hair. Her hands, the same hands that had once trembled as she handed out greasy paper bags, were now steady, trained, and ready to heal. As the graduation march began to play, echoing through the massive hall, Chloe took her place in line. She looked out into the crowd, seeing her proud parents, their faces shining with tears of joy. She felt a profound sense of peace. She had navigated the storm. She had endured the long nights, the self-doubt, and the grueling labor. She had climbed the mountain. When her name was called, the sound reverberated through the auditorium. Chloe walked across the polished wooden stage. Her steps were measured, confident, and filled with purpose. She accepted her diploma, the heavy parchment representing thousands of hours of dedication. She shook the dean's hand, smiling a smile that reached all the way to her soul. She was no longer the frightened, overwhelmed teenager crying in a drive-through window. She was a registered nurse. She was a woman who knew her worth. Later that evening, after the celebratory dinner with her family, after the hugs and the photographs, Chloe returned to her quiet apartment. She kicked off her shoes and walked over to her desk. She reached up and gently touched the glass of the frame. The silver signature on the black pick seemed to catch the dim light of the room, shining like a small, enduring beacon. She closed her eyes and offered a silent prayer of gratitude. She prayed for strength in her new career, praying that she would always treat her patients with the same infinite patience and grace that had been shown to her. And she prayed for the man in the dusty Silverado, wherever he was, traveling down some long, dark highway under the vast Texas stars. She knew she would likely never meet him again. She knew she would never have the chance to shake his hand and tell him exactly what his gesture had meant. But she also knew that men like George Strait did not do good deeds for the applause or the gratitude. They did them because it was woven into the very fabric of their being. They did them because their faith and their roots demanded it. They understood that true legacy is not built on billboard charts or platinum records, but on the quiet, unseen moments of lifting up the broken-hearted. The rain continued to fall outside, a steady, comforting rhythm against the window pane. Chloe turned off the desk lamp, leaving the room in shadows, save for the streetlights filtering through the blinds. She was ready for tomorrow. She was ready to step into the world and pay the kindness forward, one patient, one gentle word, one moment of grace at a time. The storm had passed, the dust had settled, and the light, just as the cowboy had promised, continued to shine. If this story touched your heart and reminded you of the power of kindness and respect, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and leave a like on this video. We would love to hear from you, so please share this story with your friends and leave a comment below telling us from which city you are watching. Your support helps us continue to share these beautiful moments of humanity. Keep standing tall, and thank you for being part of our community.